This is apropos. Well, US and Russian envoys meeting in Davos say they've been holding constructive talks on a possible future peace deal to end the war in Ukraine. It comes as Donald Trump's drive to acquire Greenland widens splits here in Europe. Well, the row is being watched with glee in Moscow, even though the US president's plans could have serious security ramifications for Moscow, which covets its own presence in the Arctic. Yinka Oyetade takes a closer look at how relations between Russia and the United States are evolving under Trump.
It's a moment that came to define their relationship. After a private 2-hour meeting with only their interpreters present, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin stepped out side by side at their 2018 Helsinki summit. What followed stunned Washington. The US president broke with his own intelligence agencies, taking Putin at his word when he denied interfering in the 2016 election that brought Trump to power.
I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. And what he did is an incredible offer.
At the time, both the CIA and FBI had concluded Russia did interfere. The moment perhaps emblematic of Trump's unusually favorable view of the Russian leader, a leniency that at times has shown itself as outright praise. Trump's once said of Putin while Barack Obama was still in office, the Russian president gets an A for leadership. Putin has returned the compliments, describing his now US counterpart as a very flamboyant and talented man during Trump's first presidential campaign.
Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me.
Trump's account of their relationship, raised again during a clash with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, only reinforced perceptions of the pair's mysterious closeness. Trump has long expressed his fondness for strongmen, and that's exactly what he sees in Vladimir Putin. But those same strongman instincts have strained their relationship during Trump's second term. In April of 2025, Trump took to social media, publicly venting his frustration at Putin for continuing Russia's 3-year war in Ukraine, urging him to stop as Trump attempted to broker a peace deal. Putin has since praised Trump's efforts.
President Trump is making serious efforts to end this conflict. As I have said many times, he is, in my opinion, absolutely sincere.
Since returning to office in January, Trump has spoken with Putin more than 6 times, likely more than any other world leader. A closeness some believe predates Trump's presidency, with long-standing speculation Trump has denied the KGB once sought to recruit him during a 1987 visit to the Soviet Union. Others suggest Putin holds undisclosed leverage over the US president. Whatever the truth, Trump has pursued a clear rapprochement with Putin since reclaiming the White House, at a time when Russia remains largely sidelined by the international community.
Well, for more on how Washington has managed relations with Moscow during this first year of Donald Trump's second term, we're joined by Thomas Graham, a distinguished fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks so much, Thomas, for being with us on the programme. You have a lot of experience in this area. You've taught courses on US-Russian relations and Russian foreign policy. You're also Senior Director for Russia on the National Security Council staff. What do you make of Donald Trump's approach to and relationship with the Kremlin?
Well, certainly it is a strange relationship. He does have a certain affinity for Putin that goes back many, many decades, but he's found it very difficult to translate it into hard policy that actually advances American interests. You know that President Trump came to office in January of last year, hoping to build a closer relationship with Russia and hoping to end the Russia-Ukraine war in 24 hours, as he said during the campaign. He thought that he would be able to do that because he had, as he said, a very close personal relationship with President Putin. Here we are a year later, and certainly the Russia-Ukraine conflict hasn't been ended. The desire to normalize relations with Russia has actually proceeded very, very slowly, in part because the continuing conflict in and around Ukraine is a serious impediment to normalization of relations. It puts severe limits on what President Trump can do because of domestic political considerations. What we see is a very mixed picture over the past year. An effort at rapprochement that hasn't gone very far, an effort to end the conflict that hasn't reached fruition yet. All that said, President Trump, through his actions, through his words, has opened up perhaps the most serious set of negotiations over a possible settlement of the Ukraine crisis over the past couple of months.
But on one hand, Trump claims to, for example, fear the threat that Russia poses to US security when it comes to Greenland. On the other hand, he's repeatedly taken Vladimir Putin's side when it comes to the situation in Ukraine. He's now invited him to join his so-called Board of Peace for Gaza. How do you square all of this? There seems to be a real lack of consistency in his approach, not just to Russia, but when he is on the international stage.
Well, certainly, look, nobody has accused President Trump of consistency. What we all say is he is unpredictable. And he waxes hot and cold on President Putin. He still wants to build a close relationship with Russia. He thinks that is good for security reasons. He thinks that's good for commercial reasons. And so he's always been hesitant to go too far out of fear that he might alienate Putin. Strangely enough, we see the same thing on President Putin's side. He knows that Trump is unpredictable, and at times when you expect him to push back very hard against the United States, say with the bombing of Iran in the summer of last year, or the recent events surrounding Venezuela, Putin has remained silent, in part because he's concerned that if he pushes back too hard, he would alienate Putin. So you've got a strange relationship between the two. They want to normalize relationships. They know that each side is taking steps that run contrary to their interest, but they never push as hard as they would in other circumstances because they still hold out hope for this rapprochement.
And what would actually normalizing relations with Russia actually entail? What would it look like? What kind of significance would that have for Europe?
This is an interesting question, in part because while the presidents have talked about normalization, they've never laid out in detail what exactly that would mean. I think it's clear that at the top of the list of President Trump lies what we might call strategic commercial relations, deals in the energy sector, perhaps something in space. President Trump is always interested in fostering good commercial relations. It would also mean what President Trump has called strategic stability, some agreement on how we're going to manage our strategic arsenals, our nuclear weapons going forward. But I think many other people would see normalization of relations as including an equitable settlement of the Ukraine conflict, a restructuring of European security that protects Ukrainian interests, European interests, provides sufficient deterrence against possible Russian challenges in the future. Those things are extremely important. But again, President Trump hasn't talked about these in detail, neither has his administration.
And given the urgency of dealing with the war in Ukraine, is it possible right now to think of, a longer term strategy when it comes to how the US should be dealing with Russia? What would your advice be, for example, if you were still associated with the National Security Council?
Well, I think we need to have two prongs. I mean, clearly we need to be focused on bringing the conflict to an end. And the administration needs to set up a serious set of negotiations with Moscow, as well as with our Ukrainian partners and our European allies. But that doesn't preclude thinking about how we might deal with Russia over the long term. Russia isn't going to go away. It's going to continue to be a rival of the United States. It still has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. And so we're going to have to manage very carefully this relationship with Russia into the future. I think if we begin to think clearly about how we would do that over time, it also helps us begin to see what we need to accomplish out of a Ukrainian settlement. What we do in Ukraine, the way this conflict is settled, is going to have consequences for European security. It's going to have broader consequences for U.S.-Russian relations. And without some sort of vision of how we're going to manage that relationship going forward, it makes it more difficult to devise strategies that will both deal with our immediate problems and prepare us for the longer term.
And it's been very difficult to predict how Donald Trump might act on any particular issue. But do you think that his policies when it comes to Russia, they might be more considered than they appear at first hand, more thought out? And what do you make of the suggestion, we saw it in Yinka's report before we came to you, that Vladimir Putin might have some kind of leverage over Donald Trump?
Well, first, I tend to discount the notion that President Putin has some leverage over President Trump. If he did, it's hard to see how it has really helped Russia advance its own national interest. It hasn't produced a settlement on Ukraine that is absolutely in Russia's favor. It hasn't inclined President Trump to lean more heavily on Ukraine. It hasn't inclined Trump, for example, to walk away from these negotiations. So I tend to discount that he has any serious leverage over President Trump. The relationship between the two men is based on, as I already said, a unique, sometimes strange affinity that President Trump appears to have for strongmen, President Putin in particular. Where this is going to go, very difficult to say at this point. President Trump does want to normalize relations, as I've said, but I've seen very little from what he has said in public. I've heard very little from the conversations that I have had with senior officials in Washington as to what that relationship would look like in concrete terms going forward.
Thomas, thanks so much for that insight and that analysis. It's a fascinating conversation. We do appreciate your time on the programme. That is Thomas Graham, Distinguished Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you.